Good evening, I'm Abe.
And I'm Frank. And today, we're admiring the first half of Chapter 37, the Eisenhower era, in Kennedy, Cohen, and Bailey's The American Pageant textbook. As usual, my comrade Abe will be starting it off.
Let's go. The 50s were an age of prosperity, and there was a surge in home construction. And new developments in science and technology fueled economic growth. For example, the transistor revolutionized electronics, and computers made telecommunications and high-speed printing possible. The aerospace industry also expanded immensely with the development of the Boeing Company and the first large passenger jet, the 707. At the same time, the shift to a service-based economy or a post-industrial economy was evidenced by the fact that white-collar workers now outnumbered the blue-collar workers. With this shift, union membership began to decline. Many women returned to managing the home after the war, but some remained in the workforce. Women workers actually took the majority of the new jobs created, mostly in service or clerical work. In 1963, Betty Friedan published The Feminine Mystique, which became a classic in feminine protest literature. This book sparked the modern women's rights movement. Now, Frank, could you tell me about the culture of the 50s?
Absolutely. The 50s gave rise to some of America's most successful companies, like Disney and McDonald's. Television grew increasingly popular, supplanting the radio, and preachers such as Billy Graham and Oral Roberts used the TV as a way to preach to the masses, much as FDR had done using the radio. People like Oral Roberts and Billy Graham became known as televangelists because they would present their religious views over the airwaves of the TV. Men such as Elvis Presley introduced the nation to a radically new form of music, rock and roll. The consumer culture in general led to some to criticize the post-war generation as being conformist, as everyone rushed to buy what everyone else had. Abe, can you tell me who took the helm of presidency after Truman?
Of course. When the election of 1952 rolled around, the Democrats nominated Adlai E. Stevenson, while the Republicans nominated the war hero Dwight D. Eisenhower, Ike, whose running mate was Richard Nixon. Ike left most of the campaigning to Nixon. However, Nixon was soon accused of accepting illegal donations, so he delivered the monumental Checkers speech, in which Nixon denied all the accusations and saved himself. Television became a political tool that allowed candidates to talk directly to voters, and Ike delivered many scripted, televised spots that laid the foundation for political advertising in the future. Ike won the election of 1952 and immediately embarked on a 3-day visit to Korea. After 7 months, an armistice was finally signed, ending the Korean War with Korea divided at the 38th parallel. Overall, Ike was known as an unpolitical president who abstained from petty conflicts between political parties, and he strove to maintain the respect of the citizenry. Now, Frank, a couple episodes ago, you accused me of being a communist.
True.
Now, I would like to reciprocate, and I now think you're a communist. Who would support my opinion?
Well, one man, Senator Joseph McCarthy. Now, he was the first problem to face Eisenhower, the rise of Senator Joseph McCarthy. McCarthy began to launch a series of witch hunts for communist infiltration in government ranks. McCarthy mainly accused those in the Democratic Party and State Department, and his vehement attacks gave birth to McCarthyism, or a time span in American history in which the government tried to root out supposed communist infiltrators. Eisenhower responded to McCarthy by ignoring him. And eventually McCarthy fell from grace due to his Army McCarthy hearings, in which he falsely accused the Army of communist infiltration. Abe, under Eisenhower, did America seek to desegregate black and white society?
No, it didn't, by any means. The 15 million blacks in America were bound by the Jim Crow laws, a system of segregation based on the separate but equal philosophy that allowed for separate toilets, drinking fountains, schools, and more. Furthermore, less than 20% of eligible blacks in the South were registered to vote. Blacks fought back as Paul Robeson and Josephine Baker went on show tours to inform audiences about the atrocities of the Jim Crow laws, and Gunnar Myrdal published the book An American Dilemma, which exposed the contradiction between the American Creed and the Jim Crow laws. Furthermore, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat in the whites-only section of a bus, and thus sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, during which blacks refused to ride the buses. Now, Frank, could you tell me about the further developments in the civil rights movement?
Of course I can. In 1948, Truman ended segregation in the government, but Eisenhower, the one to come after Truman, showed no interest in furthering desegregation. However, don't worry, Abe, because Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren sought to do Ike's work for him, and in 1954 decided to disallow segregation in public schools in the crucial case Brown versus Board of Education, in which it was decided that separate but equal was inherently unequal. Unfortunately, whites in the South didn't take kindly to this ruling and stated that they would organize massive resistance to integration. In the long term, they were unfortunately successful, as 10 years later, only 2% of whites and blacks had been integrated in the schooling system. However, others moved to continue the fight against segregation. Congress created the Civil Rights Act in 1954. Martin Luther King founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and students across the South formed the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee, which hosted sit-ins and other protests against Jim Crow laws. Alright, Abe, if Eisenhower didn't do much to combat segregation, what did he do?
Well, Eisenhower advocated for dynamic conservatism, in which he supported liberal policies in things which deal with the people, and conservative policies for money, the economy, and the government. He wanted to balance the federal budget and keep out the creeping socialism, so he discontinued Truman's military buildup and supported a small government philosophy. In Operation Wetback, a response to the Bracero program, Eisenhower rounded up around 1 million Mexicans and returned them to Mexico. He also wanted to end Indian tribes as legal entities and thus revert to the assimilationist policies of the Dawes Severalty Act. Eisenhower did accept some New Deal-esque programs. He supported the Federal Highway Act of 1956, which planned to build 42,000 miles of highways. Ike believed that highways would be very beneficial to the national defense since they would allow U.S. troops to easily mobilize. The highways did, however, contribute to problems of energy consumption and air quality. Now, Frank, how would you characterize the foreign policy under Ike?
Well, by 1952, the Republicans were calling for reforms of military strategy, and Secretary of State John Doles proposed a policy of boldness, which mandated an arsenal of super bombers armed with nuclear warheads be ready to strike at any time. Unfortunately, this strategy had a fatal flaw, which was demonstrated to the world in the aftermath of the Hungarian uprising. In that instance, the USSR brutally crushed a Hungarian revolt. But since the US was unwilling to start a nuclear war over such an issue, it was left with nothing to do at all, since its only option was massive retaliation through a nuclear strike. Thank you for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe.
And comment down below if you have any questions.
As usual, we'll catch you guys next time.